This is section 4, where I'll be talking about vaccines. So I'll start by explaining how vaccines are usually developed, and I'll talk about the ingredients in these mRNA vaccines. And then I'll go over data from both of the Pfizer and Moderna clinical trials, and I'll also give a little update on how vaccine rollouts are doing. And I'll end by answering some questions about vaccines, specifically mRNA vaccines, vaccination, things like that. And I also explain herd immunity, which is the goal of a vaccine. This is the typical approval process that vaccines go through. So first you start off with preclinical research, which involves cell or animal trials, and you can also combine those results with what we know about other related viruses. Phase 1 clinical trials test the safety and immune response in normally less than 100 people, and Phase 2 trials still check the safety of that vaccine along with better dosages and effectiveness in hundreds of people with varying health conditions. And the third phase tests thousands of people from the general population, and it also tests for rarer side effects because you're testing more people. And again, you want to see how well it works. After this, the FDA reviews all of that data, and if it's safe, they continue on to phase 4, which is mass vaccination, and they keep studying its safety and how well it works long term. So what's in the vaccine? First, you have mRNA that codes for the spike protein, and I've talked about this in previous videos. And this mRNA can be made synthetically, so there's no need to grow it in cells or chicken eggs like they do for the flu vaccine. So this mRNA is packaged in a coat of fats, and the fancy name for fats is lipids. And these fats or lipids protect the mRNA and help it get into the cells. These vaccines also contain some salts and table sugar or sucrose that help with storing the vaccine in cold temperatures, and that is all that's in these vaccines. When the FDA reviews vaccine clinical trial data, they have to weigh the side effects and risk and benefits of the vaccine to the disease that the vaccine prevents. So this is a quote from the FDA that says, "Issuance of an EUA or emergency use authorization requires a determination that the known and potential benefits of the vaccine outweigh its known and potential risks." So the clinical trials are a way to find the risks and benefits, and they agreed that the benefits did outweigh the risks for both vaccines, so both vaccines were given an EUA. So first, I want to describe a few rules that the trials followed. So both of the Pfizer and Moderna clinical trials were placebo-controlled. So this means that they contained one group that got the vaccine and another group called the placebo group or the control group that got a saline shot. So they did not get the vaccine. The purpose of the placebo group is to have a baseline to compare how well the vaccine works. And both trials were also randomized, and that means that the patients were randomly assigned to either the placebo group or the vaccine group. These trials were also double-blinded, and that means that neither the participants nor the doctors evaluating the patients and running the study knew which shot the participant received. So this prevents the doctor from being accidentally biased in their evaluations. Both trials also used similar RNA vaccines, and both mRNAs contain instructions for the spike protein. So if you want to understand how that gives you immunity, you can watch sections 2 or 3. This is an overview of the most important data from both clinical trials. So Pfizer's trial had about 44,000 participants older than 16. They had 95% efficacy, which means that there is a 95% reduction in the risk that a person will get COVID after getting the vaccine. How did they find this number? Okay, in the entire trial, they had a total of 170 cases, and 162 cases were in the placebo group, and only 8 cases were in the vaccine group. So this supports that the vaccine prevents COVID-19 disease. Out of the 170 cases, 10 cases were classified as severe, and 9 were in the placebo group, and only 1 severe case was in the vaccine group. So that can also support that the vaccine also prevents severe cases. Okay, so now let's look at Moderna. Basically the same thing. Moderna's trial had about 30,000 participants, 18 and older, And they had a 94% average efficacy, but their efficacy dropped down to 86.4% in those above 65. So Pfizer had the same average, 95% efficacy in all ages, and Moderna's dropped a little bit, as you can see here. So Moderna's trial had a total of 196 COVID cases. 185 of those occurred in the placebo group, and 11 occurred in the vaccine group. Out of the 196 cases, 30 of them were severe, and all of these severe cases occurred in the placebo group. So that supports that the vaccine prevents severe COVID-19 symptoms. And by the way, these data have been statistically evaluated to make sure that we can confidently make conclusions like this from these numbers. And there were also conditions that defined a confirmed case of COVID-19, which you can look up in the FDA data if you want. I post that a few slides later. So this is a graph of Pfizer's results from their trial. So on the bottom here along the x-axis, we have days after dose 1. And up here, this is the number of people that are getting sick during the trial. So confirmed cases of COVID up here. And you can see the first maybe 10 days, both of the vaccine and the placebo groups are going along at the same rate. And then after about 10 to 14 days, the vaccine group levels off. So very few people are getting sick here versus the placebo group just keeps on going up. And so this is the reason why we have this placebo group, so we can make the comparison with the results from the vaccine group. So this is a graph of Moderna's results. Same thing, days after dose 1 and the number of people who get sick. And the colors are reversed, of course, from the past graph. And so the placebo group is in the blue here and the vaccine group is in the red, but they basically had similar results. So they can estimate how long immunity will last based on how strong of an immune response is produced in most people. And scientists have estimated the immunity from these vaccines to last about 2 years, but of course this is going to be monitored to make sure that it does at least last that long, because whenever we can see those antibody levels start to drop off, we need to start distributing a booster vaccine. Also, I think it's important to note that all ages had a strong immune response, which is a great sign, especially in older populations, because they tend to not respond as well as young people to vaccines. So this is a great result on that. And I also want to say that the main goal of the vaccine trials was to make sure that the vaccine prevented symptomatic cases that lead to severe disease, which they have proven that they do. But Moderna also showed some possible protection from infection, not just symptomatic cases after just 1 dose. The side effects that occurred during both of the vaccine trials, from most to least common, are soreness at the injection site, fatigue, headaches, muscle and joint pain, chills, and fever. But all of these symptoms show that your immune system is working to build its defenses so that you'll be immune. So these are good signs. It means your immune system is working like it's supposed to. Severe side effects or reactions were very rare, and most of the time they didn't seem to have a true connection to the vaccine, so they think they were more of a coincidence. And there were no side effects that were severe enough to prevent an emergency use authorization. So I do want to mention one side effect that was covered a lot in the news. So in the Pfizer trial, 4 people in the vaccine group developed a Bell's palsy, which is a temporary facial paralysis on one side of the face. No one in the placebo group developed it. In Moderna, they had 3 cases in the vaccine group and 1 in the placebo group. So you might be thinking, well, that's obvious, the vaccine must cause Bell's palsy. Well, actually, no. Remember, each group has about 20,000 people in it, so the rate that the Bell's palsy occurred in each group is actually lower than what you would see in the general population. So because of that, it's unlikely that the vaccine caused it. And that's why I mentioned earlier that these numbers are statistically evaluated to make sure that we can be confident in the relationships and the cause and effect that we conclude from these numbers. They didn't find any other relationships between the vaccine and other side effects like this that are more rare and a little bit more severe. And it's important to keep in mind that Rare side effects like this will occur, but they are much rarer and safer than getting COVID itself. And also, both trials will continue monitoring people for the next 1.5 to at least 2 years to monitor for even rarer side effects. Who shouldn't take the vaccine? So the CDC recommends that if a person has had a severe allergic reaction to either the first dose of the vaccine or any of the vaccine ingredients, that they should not get the vaccine. The trials also didn't allow pregnant or breastfeeding women to enter the trial, but 36 pregnancies did occur during the trial. So far, I don't think anything has happened in these pregnancies to suggest that the vaccine isn't safe. If you are pregnant or trying to get pregnant or breastfeeding, I highly recommend looking at this article linked here that answers some really common questions. The CDC recommends that you should still be able to choose to take the vaccine, but you should know that it has not been widely tested in pregnant people. People younger than 16 weren't included in the trials, but children normally have stronger immune systems and lower risks of severe disease. There are clinical trials for Moderna in teens aged 12 through 17 that are starting soon, though. Vaccines work by creating a strong and targeted immune response, which is already weak in immunocompromised people and those with HIV infections. So vaccines may be ineffective in those people, and so they also weren't included in the trials. But the best thing to do would be to talk to your doctor about this decision. These first two links will take you to the fact sheets that are given to you before vaccination. These have general information on who should take the vaccine, risks and benefits, stuff like that. And these last two links will take you to the clinical trial data for Pfizer and Moderna's clinical trials. So I looked through both of these myself, and this is where I got my information from on the last few slides about the vaccine benefits and side effects. But if you want to look at the more specific information and numbers, you can find them all at these links here. So as of Friday, January 15th, 2021, 12.3 million Americans have gotten at least the first dose of either of the vaccines, and no serious events have been associated with it at this point. This link is the source where I got that number, and you can also go to this source to see all kinds of data on cases, deaths, testing, and vaccinations all over the world. Okay, so what is the goal of a vaccine? Why do we want as many people to get vaccinated as possible? So by protecting each person individually, you reach a point where a sick person rarely comes into contact with someone who isn't immune. And this stops the spread of the virus, and this is called herd immunity. So it's estimated that for this specific virus, we'll need 70 to 80% of the population to be vaccinated to reach herd immunity. And herd immunity can only be reached using vaccines. It's risky to depend on a natural immunity, which is waiting for everyone to get sick and become immune. But remember that the length of immunity after a normal infection depends on the disease itself and how severe the case was. Right now, it's estimated to be around 5 to 8 months. Also, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, the more people that get infected and the more that this virus spreads around, it increases the chance that the virus is going to mutate. And that makes it harder for the vaccine to work against it. Also, COVID does come with some bad long-term effects in some people, so we do have to remember those too. And lastly, spread prevention measures like masks and social distancing should only be relaxed after herd immunity is reached. Okay, now I want to answer some common questions about the vaccines. So first, how was this vaccine produced so quickly? So basically, there was unlimited funding and the bureaucratic processes were streamlined. Also, they used background knowledge from other coronaviruses and diseases like SARS and MERS that have already been studied. So are mRNA vaccines safe? Yes, mRNA-based therapies have been studied for more than 3 decades, and they've been used safely in human clinical trials for more than 5 years. Also, look at the clinical trial data. They didn't skip any safety checkpoints, and the data shows that they are safe. Also, you cannot get COVID-19 from the vaccine because mRNA vaccines do not contain the virus. If you are wondering when you can get the vaccine, this is the order in which they are rolling out the vaccines in order of need. And if you want to read more about this, you can go to the CDC link here. New York Times also has an interactive where you can enter your age, health conditions, and your job to see where you are in line. That's the second link here. Okay, will the vaccine end the pandemic? Yes, but slowly. This is referring to herd immunity because enough people have to take the vaccine to reach herd immunity, and until we reach herd immunity, we still need to wear masks and social distance to slow the spread to prevent hospitals from becoming overwhelmed and make it easier to distribute vaccines. And if you want to know how masks and social distancing work, I explain that in section 6. A lot of you have asked, why do I still have to wear a mask after I get the vaccine? So one reason is that it takes a few weeks to build immunity for the virus after getting the vaccine, and it takes a while to get people vaccinated, so back to the herd immunity concept. Also, remember that the goal of the vaccines were to prevent symptomatic cases, which prevents severe symptoms and death. So that is the main goal here. And there's a difference between symptomatic cases and asymptomatic cases, infection, and contagiousness or transmission. But because it does reduce symptomatic cases and symptoms, it is likely that it reduces infection and transmission. But we need more data to be sure. Okay, so why do I have to take 2 shots? So the first shot gives you about a 50% efficacy, which is a reduction in the risk of getting COVID. And the second shot, about a month later, bumps you up to 90% efficacy. And the trials, neither of the trials included a group that only got 1 dose, but they measured this 50% risk reduction in the time between shots. So if you get the Moderna vaccine, your second dose will be 28 days later, and the Pfizer vaccine second dose will be 21 days later. And make sure that you take the same brand both times. So how can we say that the vaccines are safe long-term after only testing them for a few months? So with vaccines, typically you're going to see the majority of side effects happen really soon after vaccination, normally within 1 to 2 months. And so far, nothing serious has happened. This is why the FDA told both companies, don't even ask for an EUA until you can show at least 2 months of data after getting the second dose of the vaccine. And so far, the safety data still checks out, still looks good. Extremely rare side effects will probably be found as more people are vaccinated, but out of about 12 million in the US so far, nothing serious has been found. So personally, I wouldn't be scared of anything that occurs 1 out of every 12 million people. Also remember to weigh the benefits and risks. So the short and large-term effects of COVID are much worse and much more common than anything that the vaccine has caused so far. One of the most common questions that I've heard lately is, should I take the vaccine even if I've already had COVID? And there's a lot to my answer here, so I wanted to format it a little bit better to make it easier to read and easier to understand. So, to answer your question, yes, you should take the vaccine even if you have already had COVID. And this is because different immune systems respond differently to natural infections. And this is because you may not have had enough viruses to form a strong response in your first sickness, which leads to a weak infection, and from that you only need a weak immune response. So if you had a milder case, you can expect to have a weaker immunity from that. And so far, it's been found that natural immunity can last up to 8 months in 90% of people. But there's no way to tell if you are in that 90%. So because of things like this, reinfections have occurred, either by a weak first immune response or an immune response that weakens really quickly after the first infection. So also I do want to point out that the SARS-CoV-2 virus does interfere with your natural immune response, so it does prevent that natural immunity from being formed and doing its job and protecting you in the future as strong as it normally would. Okay, so that is kind of a summary of natural immunity with COVID. So let's compare that to immunity from the vaccine. So first off, There's a lot lower risk with the vaccine because the vaccine doesn't contain any viruses, so there's no chance that you'll get sick from the vaccine, and you also aren't going to get that suppression of your immune response because that's one way the virus makes you sick. And because there's no virus in the vaccine, you're not going to get that immune suppression. Also, with the vaccine, we can control the right amount of viral proteins to include, so we can control dosage to cause a strong enough and a long-lasting response. And that's important because we want everyone to have a consistent, strong, and long-lasting immune response. And with these two vaccines, they've projected this immunity to last for about 2 years. And this will also show when or if a booster shot is needed. So if we see that immunity start to drop after a year of this, after a year of everyone getting vaccinated, we may need to start making a booster. But if you have been infected before, the CDC says that it is okay to wait 3 months after a positive test to get your vaccination because reinfection is unlikely during that 3-month window. And by waiting, you'll give someone else the chance to be vaccinated that is at a higher risk than you. Okay, a few more questions. So you can still be infected after vaccination because remember that efficacy was only 95%, so there is still a small chance. But that chance is very low, and if you do get infected, you will probably have a very mild case. Will I test positive for COVID after being vaccinated? That actually depends on which test you take. So the PCR or the slow test and the antigen test will be negative because those tests specifically look for the presence of the virus itself. An antibody test may give a false positive because that test is looking for your immune response against the specific virus. The vaccine cannot change your DNA because DNA is locked away in the nucleus of your cells and mRNA stays in the cytoplasm. Even if the mRNA could get into your nucleus, it can't change DNA. So if you want more information about that, see sections 2 or 3. So I'm sure that by now you've heard of the mutated variant of SARS-CoV-2 going around. It's been found in several states and I think 10 countries. So first, how does this happen? So viruses mutate a lot because in order to get around, they have to copy themselves, which means they have to copy their RNA instructions. And they can make mistakes when they copy their instructions, and sometimes that causes a change in how the virus is shaped. Remember that from the science sections, the fit between the key and the lock is very important. So in this variant, it changed the shape of the spike protein key so that it fits a little better in that lock. This doesn't seem to cause any worse disease, it just makes it a little more contagious. It spreads a little more easily. But the vaccines do still work against this variant, but the more that this virus gets around, the more likely it is to mutate even more. So this is another reason why we need to reduce transmission, other than to prevent sickness and death, but we also need to keep it from mutating to maybe a more dangerous form that causes worse disease, or maybe it changes enough that the vaccines don't work against them. Okay, so why don't we have vaccines for some other common diseases? So first, remember that vaccines are incredibly specific, and that makes it hard to treat very diverse viruses. So that's going to be a virus that mutates a lot really quickly, or a disease that's caused by several different viruses like the cold. So HIV's virus mutates a lot, so that makes it hard to make a vaccine against it. Also, vaccines work by giving your immune system a target to defend itself against. And the virus that causes HIV attacks the immune system, so that immune system is already weak, so it's hard to ask that immune system to work really hard and create a strong response if it's already weak. Also, cancer has so many different types and causes. It's basically a group of hundreds of different diseases with all different causes. And basically, it's also difficult to tell your immune system to target your own body. But we do have a vaccine against the HPV or human papillomavirus that causes cervical cancer. So that is one example of a vaccine that prevents cancer because we can prevent the virus that causes that cancer. Not all cancers are caused by viruses either. Also, there are some mRNA vaccine candidates currently being investigated for use as a cancer therapy. So that's something to look forward to. And that is all on this section talking about vaccines. So next in section 5, I'll go over COVID-19 symptoms, long-term effects, and asymptomatic cases. And so here's the link to my PowerPoint and my references. You can find these in the description below. And please like this video and comment below if you have any questions.